Mr. Chair, you are recording.
Okay. I'd like to call this work session to order on AO 2020-117 S-1, providing for business personal property tax relief. Let's go ahead and start with the roll call, please.
Ms. Allard? Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar? Ms. Kennedy? Ms. LaFrance? Mr. Presberdia?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton? Ms. Zolotel?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also want to note for the record, I don't know if she was there, but Miss Kennedy is here. Okay, let's go ahead. Right, so for members, if you want to get in the queue, please put yourself in the chat or text me if you can access the chat. So let's go ahead and start with Assembly sponsors. If you want to go ahead and walk us through the latest version, and then we can go from there.
I need to go on camera.
Sure, Mr. Chair. This is Ms. Zolotel. Actually, could the clerk put up the version? We could walk through what the changes are in the S1.
Yes, I can do that if you just give me a moment.
Thank you so much.
And for members of the public, this is available on our work sessions page. If you want to go to muni.org/assembly, our work sessions page has this document on there. I want to note for the record, we've been joined by Ms. LaFrance.
While we're waiting for the document to come up, Mr. Chair, I'll just provide a quick overview. So the S1 version does a couple of main things. One is it provides that the business personal property tax filing that a business makes in January, their valuation should include a certification as to any period of time they were shut down due to the emergency declaration in March, which is up to a total of 8 weeks, if memory serves. That certification then is to be utilized should funds become available to administer a grant that would pay for that percentage reduction that's been previously discussed. So it's a tax discount or a tax rebate. You could use a variety of words, but it is contingent on other funding. I believe those are the two biggest changes in the S1. It also, I believe, conforms the definition of business to that's been utilized in the grant programs to date. And I will, from there, gladly ask the clerk to kind of scroll up into the meat of the document and see if Ms. Kennedy has anything she wants to add.
Before we go to you, Ms. Kennedy, just Ms. Allard and Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Kennedy, did you want to add?
I'll wait till the questions get answered that I think people might have, but I probably have some comments. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. You know, this version mitigated all of my primary and substantial concerns. The primary concern that I had was that the previous version had a unmeasured and very strong claim by taxpayers to make on a rebate or discount that we couldn't really tell the impact or where those funds were going to come from. And so this document, this proposed version reduces the amount available to a cap. It requires that there be a funding source, and it also puts a cap on the income. And it might be a surprise to some to hear that I think that that cap could go up from where I sit because of the amount restricted and the funding source issue. But because those 2 or 3 protections were put in, I think this is quite a reasonable and viable proposal.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, thanks. You know, I mean, this makes everything more certain. But, you know, in a way, it's just a mirage. We say we're going to do this thing, but only if these funds come forward. And should we get another batch of, and I assume that what it's referring to is, you know, similar to CARES Act funds. And if we get that, we would have to go through the process of allocating them to this anyway. And at that point, we could increase it or change it or whatever. So you know, it's almost makes it, this is really just symbolic, you know. And it just, I think, holds out hope. It shows people, hey, we're going to do this thing, and they'll have an expectation that may not be borne out. And if there is another round of federal funding, and if it doesn't come till sometime in January, February, March, people will have this expectation, but we'll have to tell them, well, no, we're not sure yet. We're not sure yet, and keep putting them off. So I'm nervous on that front. I mean, it's not real. Unless there's the funds there, we're not doing anything real. Thanks. Or correct me on that, please, because I philosophically, I think this is wonderful.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Weldon. I appreciate those observations and concerns. And really, this is to kind of take one step out of. So when we get new funding sources, we then stand up a program, which has an application and a period of time it takes to stand up. And what this is doing is really queuing up and getting us ready if funds do become available. I understand that it might feel illusory, but these folks are already filing this paperwork. They have to file this paperwork. So it's kind of like getting some of the administrative steps out of the way. We've received some responses in the CARES Act surveys that the Assembly has put out that the application processes feel onerous or hard, or people are learning about them after the funds are already gone. And so this really mitigates some of those concerns and responses we've received by baking it into a process that's already required.
Thanks, that helps. You know, in some way, I mean, these forms aren't filled out till later in the year too. So, I mean, it's not. Okay, thanks. I'll mull it over.
Thanks. Ms. Allard?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm kind of on the lines there with Mr. Weddleton. I feel like this is kind of lip service, and it's really not accomplishing anything with the public. I'll take responsibility. We put our economy and Anchorage in this situation, and we owe it to our business owners to help them get out of this mess. And when we do appropriate funds to the community, we do it on a lottery-based means, and I disagree with that as well. So if somebody's applying for funds in June, but it's a lottery and they're not going to receive any, and someone applies for funds in December, there's a definite difference in hardship. In saying that, I really think we need to reevaluate and actually say we're going to do it and not just pretend like we're going to do it, because I think that it is true that there is going to be a public perception that they're going to believe that funds are coming. And if it doesn't, we're going to be held accountable once again for not doing what we should be doing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, and my concern on that point to Mr. Weddleton is just that if we were to attempt to do something, we just need to figure out how much, a real reasonable expectation of how much and where it comes from. And with the caps that have been put on it, I think it might be a reasonable number. I don't know. But if we intend to do that, then I believe we should just find the source and have that conversation.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, and as Mr. Constant pointed out, that the original version of this was quite different. And I will say that I first of all, I absolutely appreciate Ms. Zolotel, taking a second look at it and trying to craft it into something that would actually help businesses. And I will tell you that it was quite a battle with the administration about trying to get this into some kind of form that was basically acceptable. And, as I mentioned when I originally talked about this, my intent on this was to do more, as Mr. Weddleton says, was the idea of actually providing that immediate relief on the personal property tax side of things for those people that were most directly impacted when we had the original shutdown. I'm not even talking about the most current one, but the original one. And, and my thought in that was that we were going to so many of our businesses were going to experience a reduction in their income, therefore a reduction in profit. And I thought that we shouldn't try to capitalize on that. The municipality shouldn't be allowed to just say, oh, well, sorry, that's pretty tough, but we're going to still go ahead and tax to the cap. And technically or specifically, I think that's been the attitude. I know there's been comments that, yes, we're sympathetic, but the idea that we're going to continue, though, to tax to the extent that the municipality is allowed just gives me great concern and is very kind of disturbing to think that we could carry on with that kind of attitude, knowing that there are businesses that will cease to exist. And we will lose that income from those businesses. So this was a way to try to not only alleviate the burden on those taxpayers, but basically to kind of force the municipality into that reality and say, we can't quite have this expectation of all of this income because we have businesses that have been so significantly impacted. But having said that, obviously that did not pass. So Ms. Zolotel and I worked at trying to figure out how to make this a little more palatable and still give those businesses that relief. I think Ms. Zolotel brought up the point that's a really good one. This is a mechanism that is in place as soon as we can actually implement it. I think there could be other funding sources to look at as well. We can decide, hey, we've got this program, so to speak, in place. And if there is fund balance that we can use to fund it, then we should be doing that. But what I hope in all of this is that message that the municipality has got to grasp the reality of what is happening to our businesses and therefore what is happening to revenues and income, and basically be as responsive to that as possible. I do believe that for now, this is kind of, it does nothing for right now. It truly does nothing other than set a potential expectation somewhere down the road. And so with that, I mean, I'm going to support it, but it really doesn't do exactly what it was originally intended to do. And again, like I said, I think the message needs to be that we have to be paying a whole lot more attention to what's really happening to our economy and be responsive in that way. And just like a lot of other people are cutting back or doing without, the municipality, I think, is going to have to come to that realization as well. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Perez-Revilla?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to just continue to repeat what others have said, but I guess I'm now understanding. Essentially, we're creating a framework for how to provide relief if the money were to come, and that makes sense. I suppose that we would anybody create a plan. If we get money, let's plan how to use it. And I think in some ways it sends a message to businesses that we are thinking about them and thinking about the realities that they're facing right now. And so I think that's positive. But I do agree with a couple of the comments that I think it's confusing. I think it's confusing to put forward something that isn't funded, and that so I'm concerned about putting it forward at this time. I think you could do the same thing by doing a resolution saying we're thinking about you and we care about what's going on, and when we have funding, we're going to, reduce your tax burden. So yeah, I guess I'm at this point feeling concerned that it's going to create confusion in terms of expectations, and right now, in a time with so much uncertainty, I want to reduce the amount of uncertainty. I want to be as really clear as we can about what we're going to do, so that people can depend on that. So those are my concerns. I appreciate the work that has gone into it, and I appreciate the fact that now it has some real specifics around it, so that that it's not wide open. But I am concerned just about how this is going to be understood and perceived by the public, and that it could create more confusion than help. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, thanks. So, going, maybe looking a little deeper here, it has a cap of $5,000. But to get that, you'd have to, if you were closed for 8 weeks, you'd have to have about 1.8 million in inventory. And if you're closed for 4 weeks, to get that 5,000, you'd have to have 3.7 million in inventory and other stuff, but it's mostly inventory for these things. And this would only apply to businesses that had no more than 20 full-time or part-time employees. So that's very restrictive. I think particularly if you include part-time employees as full-time. So there's, I actually would ask Mr. Gadamus if he has any way of knowing, the number of employees for businesses, because that's not typically filed. And then, would it make more sense to use full-time equivalents, like the PPP deals with, full-time equivalents, assuming 40-hour weeks, so 2 20-hour people are one person. So, I mean, not many people would get this. That's a lot of inventory for a fairly small company that might have 10 or 12 employees. So I doubt many would get that max. So if Jack is here, do you have any idea what would be the maximum amount? What if every business closed that had 20 or less employees got $5,000? What would we be talking?
Yeah, offhand, I'll maybe give this is Jack through the chair to Weddleton. I can calculate that here in the background in a couple of minutes for you, a really rough idea. At the end of the day, what you were saying before is, there's a big gap of really who would be applying for this, and at the end of the day, we just don't really know or have a really good estimate of what that value would be. So as far as the first question you said, as far as the number of employees, we don't know or have that information of how many employees each business has. Again, it's just a guess of who would be applicable, who would apply for one, and then who would also then qualify as number two. But I can give you a really rough calculation here in just a couple of minutes. I don't want to try to do a calculation right now in front of everybody, but $5,000 maximum. I'll look at the number of businesses that potentially could, our best estimate, and give that to you. So I'll just put that in the chat here.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Zalata?
Thanks. Yeah, so on the valuation issue, I think one thing that this does is it gives us a number, frankly, that we will have when these personal property tax valuations come in. And that date is March 1st, 2021 in the S-1 version here. So I think it gives us sorry, my dog's weighing in, some predictability in terms of looking for funding in advance of first quarter budget revisions. It can align, of course, with if additional stimulus comes in. And frankly, I think the most important piece to this is we're not requiring another process. It's something to go with an already existing process. I feel like we've placed the onus on folks to go and seek out these things. And this one we're taking to them. So I think that's important. It provides important data. It's a simplified process. And it's something that attaches to what we're already doing. And so I think that's important. And I hear the concerns about clarity, but I think the information in the S-1 that it is discounts are contingent, is something we just have to be really clear to communicate. Thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Constant?
So this is probably a question for Jack or Alex. So the business personal property tax, is this the same as the inventory tax?
Through the chair to Mr. Constant. So personal property tax is comprised of multiple property types, and one of them being inventory. As Mr. Weddleton had alluded to, a lot of these businesses, the majority of their personal property valuation is comprised of inventory. But there's other things such as furniture and fixings, such as desks, computers, etc. Could be machinery, equipment.
Right. So if I might then follow that on, I'm happy to support this. It came back in a way that is manageable. And I would assume that a vote yes on this is a commitment to fund it in the future should funds arise. But that, of course, is a question for another day. But the question was raised to me, why didn't it laser in on the inventory tax specifically? And in particular, what that comes to mind with is bars or restaurants that have food and other liquor that's sitting on a shelf that they can't actually sell, that they're being taxed on. And to me, that was like the direct line of response that would have made more sense. And so if this doesn't pass or comes back with some different framework, I would like to laser it in on the inventory portion of the property tax.
Yeah, through the chair to Mr. Constant, I think one of the challenges that we have with our current system is that we don't have an easy way to aggregate the personal property type by inventory, by all the different property types, like I said, by machinery, equipment, etc. So there might be some challenge there. We could look into a little bit more. I know that there are some ways to do that, but it also can be logistically challenging.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Oh, a couple points. One real quick on Chris's point. If I think in terms of bars and restaurants, their inventory, my limited experience with that goes back about 45 years ago, but they get replenished frequently, like several times a week. They have inventory come in. So I don't suspect that inventory is the biggest component of their personal property tax. It's probably more their fixtures and glasses and all their supplies and things like that, or kind of the stuff that's always there rather than the inventory. So you'd be sweeping out from the people who were most hard hit. I think if we went focused just on inventory. For retailers, it's vastly more with inventory. And then I want to get back to Meg's comment because I misunderstood, but the forms for the personal property tax are not due until I think a week or two after the federal taxes. So it's April 22nd or 30th or something like that. So we would not know the impact of this until after first quarter budget revisions. It would come as a surprise. I know you got it said here that it's all contingent on some grant funding, but I want to make sure that the timing was understood right.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Go ahead.
Thanks. No, so we realized that originally that is the date online, but we've set an earlier date if you want to be considered for purposes of the discount to March 1st. Just taking into account of the other municipality around budgeting.
Mr. Weddleton, for whatever reason, I'm getting a lot of feedback from your audio. So if you could just take a look at that. Did you have anything else, Mr. Weddleton? All right, I think we might have lost his audio. We'll go ahead and move on to Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, Mr. Weddleton covered part of what I wanted to say anyway, so I think I will just echo that you know, there certainly are businesses that have a great deal of inventory, and the idea of trying to segregate that is probably, it would be the business itself that would be able to do that. But again, if a business was closed down, you know, they weren't running their dishwashers, they weren't running their forklifts, they weren't using their computers. So even the equipment that is there in that business was basically impacted as well. So I don't necessarily want to see that separated out anyway. I think that number is the one that the businesses are asked to come up with at the end of every year, and that is a total number that they are taxed on. So I think it's fair to say that if a business was closed down, it impacted everything in their business. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, but thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Gadamus, could you go ahead and describe that chart that you put into the record, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So through the chair, this question is what was Mr. Weddleton's question about what that amount would be. And so what you can see is there's several hypothetical, there's actually 10 to be exact, hypothetical scenarios that we looked at given this S-1 version. Looking at the 8% lower limit to the upper limit of 16%. And I think if I understand Mr. Weddleton's question correctly, if you could divert your attention to the 100%, where what we did is we took the top 100 accounts and we removed them because we didn't think that they would qualify given the employee size and a few other requirements. And also we removed some other properties such as utilities, airlines, mobile homes as well. You can see that the 100% then of those remaining, the 8% reduction will be roughly about $1.5 million in relief, all the way up to about $3 million. That being said, it would be very unlikely that all of those properties, or I should say all of those businesses, would be eligible. More realistically, be something less than that. So anyways, I think that hopefully gives you a couple of points. The first point maybe to say is to point out that we did 10 scenarios because at the end of the day, we just don't know. And so we wanted to give a range, and you can see that range is huge. And then the second point too, the maximum, as maybe Mr. Weddleton was asking, you know, could vary from 1.5 to 3 million, but again, that would be an unlikely scenario in our opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Gadamus. Next, just read into the record a comment by Mr. Peterson that he was correct. Excuse me, you are correct, John, quote unquote, to a statement Mr. Weddleton made earlier. Is there any other discussion? All right, seeing no other discussion, then this will be before us on Tuesday. So please be ready with any amendments or any other items regarding this particular piece. With that, I'm going to go ahead and close this work session, and we'll see each other again at 12:10. Thank you.